So in this video, we're going to be adding in the load more button. So what we're going to go ahead and do in here is we're going to go ahead and say show load more button. And we're going to pass through that with show load more. Let's actually just simplify this by adding it in like this. And then what we want to actually go ahead and do is inside this area here, we want to extract this along with a load more button into an articles grid component, so that we can do all of this within Livewire. So let's go ahead and create a component here called article grid. And inside the article grid component, we want to go ahead in here and copy and paste this bit in here. So for now, let's just say Livewire components article grid. So first and foremost, we could pass in the articles here, or instead of basically doing all of this work in here, what we could go ahead and do in here is essentially get rid of loading the articles inside this component here, and instead just pass through the data. So let's go in and get rid of this articles part here. Let's go in and add in the limit. In this case, we call it category, although it could be multiple. We want to have the sort by added in as well. So inside our article let's go in here and find the article block. So if the article grid here, and then we have article, so let's find it in here in the folders here. Article here, perfect. In here we want to just go ahead and pass through all that information instead, so we can know it all within Livewire. So let's have a limit in here, and in this case we just want to pass through limit. So we want to go up here and say limit instead. We want to go in here and pass through a few other things as well. So let's say we want to have a category. We want to have sort by. And we want to have show load more. So let's go ahead and add those in here. And then let's have show load more. And let's also go ahead in here and add in the sort by. So now we can go inside our article grid. Let's make sure we in here also return a view. Let's go in here and make sure we have an integer of a limit set. We want to have a public one for category and a public one for sort by and for show load more. We don't need the heading in here because again we're just having the grid here. So now we essentially have the ability in here now to pass through the category, show load more, sort by, and the limit. So with that sorted, we can now go into our article grid here. And in here, what we want to go ahead and do is we want to say for each. And let's go ahead and say this articles as article. So we also need to go ahead and load the article now inside our grid here. So we can do that upon mounting and calculate what sort of approach we want to take to it. And we can set this as a boolean. And in here, let's say, in the case that we have this limit, we will set that to, we actually don't have to set it aside, we're getting that pass through, but what we can go ahead and do is we can go ahead and get the articles here. So we now say article with category. And we can go ahead and make a complicated query here. So for consistency, I'm going to call this article model. And we also want to make sure we are setting it here. This articles. And let's go ahead and then import all the articles we want to, like we did in here. So the next thing we want to go ahead and do in here is essentially we can set the article in here. So if we go ahead and say instead of data here, let's go ahead and say this and sort by. And then we want to just say use this category instead. And in here we want to say this limit. And we want to say this articles, and we want to say this articles. And then here we want to make sure we say this sort by this category. Get rid of this use statement here. And that should hopefully set it here, so we can essentially go ahead and check how our page looks like now. So if we go in here, we can say /test. And we want to go ahead in here now, and instead of saying count, we will essentially just go ahead in here and get rid of that. And then in here we are also having a small issue, so let's go ahead and fix that. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a private function in here. We're gonna call this set articles. Actually, instead of using set articles as a function, I'm gonna go ahead and have a function here, get base query. We also want a private function in here called get articles by views. We also want a private function in here, get articles by sort order. And essentially what I want to go ahead and do now is instead we can just say if this sort by is equal to popular. In that case, we want to say this articles, this get articles by views or by sort by order. At the moment, this is basically gonna error out in the editor here, but we will go ahead and create a base query now. So return article model with categories, and then we're gonna say where has categories so we basically always gonna assume we're sorting by categories here. And let's make sure we also import this. Let's get rid of this use import up here. Perfect. And then in here, we can now go ahead and say return this base query order by, and in this case, we want to go ahead and say, sorry, we want to say order by views here. And we also want to make sure that we set the limit in here, and we didn't get it. And then in here, what we just need to say is return this base query order by, this sort by in descending order, and set the limit. Alright, so let's fix this error now. So for this one, let's go ahead and say sort by in this case, and let's set that to this sort by. And if that is not set, we will set it to created add. And then what we can go ahead and do in here is we can just say this sort by instead of saying the other way around. So now we should be able to return a collection in either instance. So I'm gonna go ahead, sorry, actually make sure we import the correct one here. We can just leave it for now and just add it in like this. Currently we have an issue in here because we put in one too many dollar signs, and now we still have the same issue, but we have default fallback position now. So let's say sort by equals to in array this sort by, and we want to basically use something in here called value columns. And then in here we can then say this sort by equals created add instead. So if we go ahead in here and say value columns is created add and updated add, still gets this error here. So let's go ahead and see how we can fix that. First and foremost, let's go ahead and make sure we up here have this set as a collection. Let's make sure we just use the import in here instead. Looks a bit tidier. And then this actually should work fine, but let's go ahead and make sure we are using this query correctly. So let's cast this to array. And let's go in here to the article grid, say livewire, components, then article card. And we just need to make this styled up like a grid like we did before, and we need to add in a load more button. So I actually want to add another div in here, and in the other one here I'm going to have a div for the load more button. So in this case, for the article grid, we want to add in our columns that we had before. So if we go ahead and say class like this, we also want to say if this articles count is equal to is greater than 0, and there we go. And we also want to go ahead in here now and add in the load more button if that's set. So again, we will know if this is set because we set a variable up here called show load more. So what we should be able to do now is say if this show load more, we should be able to then have a button in here. So for this button, all we want to have is just a simple button in here, which we for now will have function in here called load more. So let's add that in here. Public function load more. And we will set show load more by default to false. So we don't have it set right now, so let's go into our admin panel, pages, article block. Let's say yes. Okay, let's try to make sure we set this properly. Let's check if it's saved. And let's also go in here now and just check what this load more is set to. Let's see if we can find it in here maybe. It's set to true. So I think we just need to cast this as a boolean when we actually pass it through. So let's go ahead in here, make sure we say boolean. And for now, let's just type on this show load more. Okay, so it seems like we have some issues with passing it through here. So for now, let's just pass it through like we did before. And let's just pass through true in here for now. So it doesn't seem like this is probably getting registered in here. There we go. So let's go ahead now and pass through the show no more button up here. And let's pass it through as a boolean again actually. Okay, and let's make sure we require this to be a boolean. There we go, perfect. So now we should hopefully be able to see it in here. There we go. So that's all for this video. Thank you very much for watching it. In the next video, we can actually allow the ability to load more articles based on the set limit. So the only other thing I want to do before we finish is just for the next video, let's go in here in the pages here and make sure we set the limit to 3 so we have a different number to test with. And then in the next video we will start adding a button here where we will just constantly be able to load more articles if that's what we want to have. So please hit the like and subscribe button and I'll see you in the next one.